Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to today's Chinese Corner. My name is George Hockey. I'm the COO of the Confucius Institute here at Coventry University, and I will be discussing the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The Chinese name is 三国演义. My tones are probably very poor. San obviously means three, Guo means countries, and Yang Yi is a romance. It's a novelization. It's a clarity. If you haven't read this book, don't worry. It is quite a large book. We'll be looking at some of the overarching ideas, the main characters, and some of the key things that happen to help us get an understanding of why this book is so important in Chinese culture. Before we get into the book, though, I would like to introduce a little bit about the Confucius Institute. The Confucius Institute here at Coventry University is a joint project between Coventry University and the Jiangxi University of Finance and Economics. And as a part of the wider Confucius Institute, our goal is to share Chinese language and culture across the West Midlands. And we do this by running a Mandarin Chinese classes, which are for all abilities, no matter if you are wanting to learn the basics or whether you are looking to achieve some certification to go to study abroad. We are able to help and support anyone. We also look to support local schools and businesses, whether we're running clubs or we're running bespoke classes to prepare people to travel abroad. If you are interested in any of the things that we are able to do, please contact us at Confucius Institute at coventry.ac.uk down here. And if you'd like to see what we're doing or follow us, we are on social media at Twitter, Insta, and Facebook. All of them are at Confucius Cov Uni. So today we are talking about one of the four great novels in Chinese history. Now, if you have not heard of these, I want to introduce them because these are the four most widely known, most popular, and most influential books and novels in Chinese history. This is actually the third of a series of talks that I have been given on these four great novels. I have already spoken about Journey to the West, which is one that shapes many childhoods across China, and is where many of you may have heard of the Monkey King. He is from Journey to the West. We've also looked at Dream of Red Mansions in a previous video, which is a very Tolstoy-esque book about Chinese culture and family dynamics of some of the nobility and their class issues. It's a fantastic book, and The Dream of Red Mansions is actually my favorite, and I shall put a link into the chat later on where we might be able to find this. Today we are looking at the Three Kingdoms, or what's called Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So this is a massively influential book that was written in the 14th century and is actually related to a real and specific period of Chinese history, more so than any of the other novels. So I would recommend, if you are wanting to learn about some of the background to Chinese culture or some of the underlying ideas, whether it's family, mythology, or old cultural ideas and Confucianism, these are fantastic places to start, because one of the great and binding things for all of us culturally is stories. We learn our culture through the stories our parents tell us. We learn them through the literature which is presented to us in schools, and this shapes a shared identity and a shared understanding through the lessons that are learned through, for us, perhaps the Aesop fairy tales. These novels are so widely shared across China that they are fantastic for gaining some sort of understanding of the historical culture and where some of the cultural ideas come from. You can find all of them on Amazon in English, or you can look online and you can find synopses of all of them if you just want to know the basics. So let's get started on Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Now, this was written by a chap called Luo Guanzhong, who is not widely known about. His life is, many people have tried to figure out, but there's not a lot known about him. He was born in around 1330, lived to about 1400, and many believe he was born in the city of Taiyuan in Shanxi province in northern China. Others argue that he was born in other places, but I like the idea that he was born in the city of Taiyuan because I have a very strong personal connection to this city. This is my wife's hometown, and my daughter was born there. So I like the idea that he is from there. He's an interesting character. All that we really know about him at the minute is that the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this Three Kingdoms book was mainly written by him, but he was also credited by many for editing one of the other four great novels, which is called Water Margin. It's also called Outlaws of the Marsh, and it is by and large, it is one of my least favorite novels. It's perhaps not simply out of the four. It's a novel that I have actually become very angry reading it. I really did not like this and have had many discussions about the issues that I found in this book, but perhaps that will be a talk for another time. I did enjoy Three Kingdoms. I think this was the first of all of the four great novels that I read, and it really did stay with me. So, what is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms? So, it is very much a historical novel based around the fall of the Han Dynasty, brought about by what was called the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Forgive my spelling here. Around the year 184. So, this was written obviously centuries after the fact, but it's based around a real events that happened when China was almost falling apart at the end of the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty and the Han emperors had joined China together, but when they were rebelled against and when they were pretty much brought down, the country had fallen apart. So this led to a time of great instability across China. And between the end of the Han Dynasty and the start of the Jin Dynasty, China was, as you can guess from the title of the book, this was split into three main kingdoms. So these kingdoms were the Shu, the Wei, and the Wu kingdoms. Don't worry, you don't need to remember any of this. There will not be a test later on. But as I say, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. So this is, as I said, based very much on real history. However, it is a romanticization. It's not a historical treatise. It is a novelization, a romanticization of this period of instability. So, what's the novel about? The novel, you can imagine, it is about the period of time. And to describe the novel, it's worth mentioning that it's a long novel. There are about 120 chapters. It's different translations run from about 1,000 to 1,200 pages. There are many, many different plots, but the central characters and the central motivations across all of them is a shared goal to unify China under, well, the central characters all wish to bring China together under their own rule. So the central protagonist, the main person, is a chap called Liu Bei. He was descended from the rulers of the Han Dynasty, and they seek to overthrow, or they seek to really go against the main antagonist, who is someone called Cao Cao, and he is the leader of a different kingdom, the Wei kingdom. So fundamentally, the overall plot are three competing kingdoms, all looking to join China under their central rule. And across the novel, we follow various leaders, warlords, advisors who perhaps shift allegiances. They go through a series of battles throughout this entire war. There are people who reach great successes, and there are massive failures, until ultimately the country is brought together without any of the three central protagonists still living. So the first thing to look through is, I feel, for this novel is really to look at some of the key characters to help understand who we're following and what happens. The first one, perhaps the main character, who's perhaps not the most interesting, is Liu Bei, who is the leader of the Shu kingdom. Now, he was the founder and the first ruler of the state of Shu, and although he was a relation of the imperial family from the Han dynasty, he grew up in poverty. So after his father had died, his family lost all of their wealth, and he grew up without any real position, without any real power. However, he was well aware of his background and his history through his mother's town, and he had developed a huge ambition. So many people will hold him up as a very influential figure of coming from a sort of rags to riches story. So when he was very young, when he was a teenager, he was literally selling shoes and straw mats as living a pauper's lifestyle, and rose to become the leader of the entire state of Shu, which covered the southwest of China. So places like Sichuan, Chongqing would have been under this area. As I said, today many people hold him up as a great example of a leader, as a manager, as someone who attained great wealth. So he is perhaps the central protagonist, but for many he is not the most interesting character. We'll get to these perhaps later on. The primary antagonist would be Cao Cao. Now, this is where there is some discussion. Perhaps we've had some discussion recently when I'm preparing for this session with other people who want to make it very plain that in the novel, Cao Cao is presented as the antagonist. He's very much presented as the bad guy, the one that our heroes are going against. However, in the what's understood in a lot of history, that is a much less clear relationship between Cao Cao and the rest of the world. He is, interestingly, was not actually an emperor. He was one of the Grand Chancellor of the Han Dynasty before it fell, and his power came from his proximity to the young Emperor Xian, who was descended from the previous emperor of the Han Dynasty. So he was very much a sort of figure who ruled from behind the throne, as it were. So in the novel, he's depicted as a tyrant, as massively ambitious, someone who's utterly ruthless, who wants things mostly for himself. However, he was also known in real life as a poet, and many people see him as actually a rather good leader, someone who had followed the correct way of looking from the previous dynasty of the Han emperors and trying to maintain and hold that up against the pretenders, as it were. The next person who is perhaps less focused, but I've put him here because he was the leader of the third kingdom, the kingdom of Wu, would be Sun Quan. Now, he was the founder of the leader of the Wu kingdom, which covered southeastern area of China. Obviously, that means Cao Cao had the northern parts and the main areas. And he was very young. He came to the throne around 18 years old. He's in the novel portrayed as perhaps a little bit more neutral. He's not necessarily so active. He's very much the sort of the third rather than the one of the main two protagonists. He's a little bit more flexible, and in some parts of the novel, he's very much more willing to work with the other leaders. So we'll see later on as we look at some of the key plot points and the key areas of the novel. Sun Quan was perfectly willing to create relationships with Liu Bei to help the balance, to help prevent Cao Cao becoming the overall leader. A lot of his success is attributed to his advisors. One of the central one being Zhou Yu, who, while not a central character, was very influential later on. As I mentioned these, it's very worth talking about the names, because when I read these novels, I find one of the greatest difficulties is keeping track of all of the characters. There are many characters, and for someone like myself whose Chinese is not great, it is somewhat difficult to keep track of all of the different Chinese names. They're often quite unfamiliar. So in many of these novels, when I've read, I have taken a few notes to help remind who some of the people are, and sometimes whether I like them or not. It's I mentioned previously when we're looking at the Dream of Red Mansions, it's very useful to have something like a family tree or a list of characters, just to help keep things straight, because Chinese names, certainly for myself, are very difficult to keep straight. The next one, Zhuge Liang, perhaps one of my more favorite characters. Now, Zhuge Liang is portrayed as an absolutely brilliant strategist and the genius who supports and advises Liu Bei through the romanticization and novelization of the Three Kingdoms. Zhuge Liang is held up as an absolute genius, and through the book and in the novel, he's also shown to have almost supernatural powers of foresight and some ability to control the weather, although that is perhaps through prayer. This is not entirely clear. He's perhaps also one of the most recognizable, as when we see him in novels, in manga, in comics, in computer games, he's generally portrayed as wearing white and with a feathered fan. So he's a unique character and always quite obvious. We'll have a little look later on about examples of the strategy, but he was someone who's very passionate. Interestingly, when we look at the real life, there is an argument made by some that he was perhaps not as much of a genius as he's portrayed in the novel. He simply was in the right place and right time to be a big fish in a smaller pond, working for Liu Bei rather than Cao Cao or Sun Quan, who had many more advisors. However, that's not a debate that's necessary for the book. It's more a case of looking that many people are very eager to try to look and find that balance between the novelization and what can be shown as historical fact. The next one is a massively important character, and perhaps the most influential, the character from the novel who has had the greatest influence on Chinese culture, and an influence that is still seen very, very much across the country, is Guan Yu. And if you've been looking into Chinese culture, you may well have seen depictions of him. If you've been to China, many people have statues of him. He was one of the two sworn allies or chosen brothers of Liu Bei. And he is recognizable as having this very long, straight beard, and having I believe it's called a glaive, so the stick with the knife, the long knife at the top of it. We can see him In fact, there is an enormous statue of him which was created not too long ago, and I unfortunately slipped my mind at the moment exactly where that is. But if you Google Guan Yu, that will be one of the first things that comes up. So he was a revered warlord and general, and his exploits in the novel showed loyalty and righteousness. He was upheld as this highly honorable character, so honorable to a fault, and as epitomizing the positive Chinese culture. So he was in many ways, well, he was literally deified in the Sui dynasty due to this reputation and the sort of the showing of all these great positive Chinese values, which is why for many years, for some areas of Buddhism and Taoism, he's actually put up as a god. He is worshipped, and especially in Shanxi province, which is where he is originally supposed to have come from, many people still claim to be descended from him, if their surname is Guan. Now, we'll come to exactly how he comes in a moment, but he has a very interesting route through it. Again, meeting Liu Bei, being one of his key supporters, being one of the main generals, and also developing a relationship with the antagonist Cao Cao at one point, whilst maintaining his again his loyalty and his righteousness, and gains the respect of everyone because of this. The next one is Zhang Fei. Zhang Fei is the third of the sworn brothers, alongside Liu Bei and Guan Yu, and he is he's portrayed as this mighty and powerful warrior with a very large bushy beard, and shown to have a very very furious temper, and is shown to be quite heartless. Sometimes, if looking and not accepting people who don't live up to his standards, and being very brutal with his own men underneath him. So alongside those three, Zhang Fei is perhaps also in a lot of media because of the temper, because of the beard and the size. He can also be shown as occasionally some sort of comedic relief, just as the one who's somewhat less important than many of the others. So those are some of the central characters. We've got the leaders of each of the three kingdoms, but we tend to focus on the people around Liu Bei, who is, again, the leader of the Shu things. So the next stage, I'd like to look at a few of a couple of the main events of the novel, and what they really mean. So one of the central events or one of the key early events is this meeting of Liu Bei, Zhang Fei, and Guan Yu and how they became brothers. And I think this is a very interesting aspect, because culturally it's quite different from what we might expect. So, as I've mentioned before, the novel begins during this rebellion of what some call Yellow Turban, others call Yellow Scarfs. During this time, the government put out a call for soldiers, and Liu Bei went to see this. When reading the sign, he sighed, because he felt like there was little he was able to do. Fortunately for him, Zhang Fei had heard the sigh and decided to become involved, and said, "Why are you should not sigh. We should do something. We should raise some troops and try to actually show their value and work towards this." So that they meet one another, and they agree with one another that they have some good value, or they share some of the key strong values, and this leads to them looking for soldiers. But they come to meet Guan Yu in this nearby tavern. As in the start of any good adventure, they start by meeting in a tavern, and they were very impressed with his presence. And when they talk to him and his background of being defending and being very honorable against people who were bullying others, and they meet and they talk, and the next day they have such a strong connection that they go to Zhang Fei's farm, and they decide to make a sacrifice and actually swear an oath to one another to be sworn brothers. And one of the key parts of this promise is that they, while they're not born on the same day of the same month, the same year, they hope to die so they hope they have almost a death pact straight away with one another to say that they are sworn brothers, and this is the start of them raising their armies, building up towards the foundation of the Shu kingdom. And it's one of the central aspects of the novel. And I think, again, we can look and see the importance of, again, honor, loyalty throughout the novel, these links, and showing that, again, loyalty, respect, honor to one another, they are throughout the novel. And we can see if we look online, there's a lot of art of this particular moment. And you can see the art here on this slide. We have Guan Yu with a long beard. We have Liu Bei looking very honorable in the middle, and Zhang Fei looking very angry with his big beard on the right. So the next thing that I want to look at is perhaps one of the, well, we've looked at perhaps the start. The Battle of the Red Cliff is in many ways the climax of the movie. This is the largest battle of the war. This is the largest conflict, which involves all of the central characters, and in many ways it is quite decisive. It's also an ability and a time where many of the characters can show their intelligence, their worth, their value, and yeah, it's very, very well known through, oh, excuse me, my mouse is having a fit, through Chinese history, through Chinese culture, and it's a fixture in pop culture, the Battle of Red Cliff. So this is, again, a real historical battle, and it's used to show some of the abilities of the participants in different ways. So as we've mentioned earlier, in this battle, Cao Cao has been becoming more and more powerful. He's raised his armies, and despite many other battles throughout the novel, his army is the largest, and he is trying to attack and take over the rest of China. So Liu Bei and Sun Quan decide to join with each other. They ally with each other at a highly strategic point of this river surrounded by the cliffs. And what makes this very interesting are some of the tactical tricks, the betrayals, the intrigue, all surrounding the preparations for this battle as much as the battle itself. So we see that Cao Cao and his generals trying to undermine one another, trying to try and trick the opposition, understanding that there are spies here. We see Sun Quan with his plans. We see Liu Bei with their plans. We see princesses go across to trick people from going things. We see Zhuge Liang praying for the wind and using his wits. And we also see interesting conflicts between the allies, which is perhaps the next one as part of this. One of the most, for me, one of the most memorable and interesting parts of the novel is what's called the adventure of collecting arrows. Now, this is a massively interesting, or massively famous occurrence, and it's, again, shown a lot. So Zhuge Liang, as we've mentioned, is portrayed as an absolute genius, and this is one of his shining moment across the entire novel. As, excuse me, he is the main advisor to Liu Bei, the central protagonist, and his rival Zhou Yu is also the very, very intelligent, very, very influential advisor to Sun Quan. Now, because of their positions, they have a very strong rivalry, which, again, you can imagine reading the novel, this is very intricate and quite complex, but this leads to a very interesting challenge that Zhou Yu puts towards Zhuge Liang to make 100,000 arrows before the battle, and if he would not be able to, then he would be executed. And ultimately, this is an opportunity for Zhuge Liang to show his ability, because he obviously does not, you can imagine, he doesn't start hurrying and panicking and getting people to start making arrows for him. He simply gets together a very simple plan, using his understanding of the weather, that there would be a fog happening, and knowing that the enemy is on the other side of the river. He puts together a fleet of straw boats, so he outfits a group of 20-odd boats, and during a foggy evening, he brings those boats and sails those boats all up together alongside in front of the enemy, knowing, and again, some people would be there playing music, and in some media there are people, fake soldiers on these boats. So as they go along past the enemy of course believe that they are being attacked. They're not clear of the numbers because of the fog, and of course they shoot many arrows at this boat. And as they go across, of course, these boats are collected. The arrows are collected on these boats, and at one point they're collecting so many that the boats are almost capsizing, so they simply turn them around so that they collect them on the other side. Of course, this at the end of this not only shows Zhuge Liang's his intelligence, his confidence, his awareness, and embarrasses the rival Zhou Yu, it also helps future ideas of undermining the generals in charge of the troops who had shot all of the arrows, and that also helps again with further intrigue of undermining the trust between Cao Cao and his generals. So we can see from this example that it does not really matter if this is in any way historically accurate. This is a very intriguing aspect of the novel. It's again the closest that the protagonists get to one another, and it's able to show the intricacies and abilities of all of the people involved. And again, you can imagine it's a wonderful imagery of outsmarting people through a simple trick and collecting arrows. I love this part. That's a very interesting one. And again, people in TV shows, movies, we can see this portrayed and done again and again. The next one that I would like to briefly mention is at one stage that Guan Yu is taken hostage by Cao Cao. He is captured after a siege that goes wrong, and he is able to be taken hostage by Cao Cao. Now, he only allows himself to be taken hostage on some conditions. He puts forward 3 rules to say that he was there to protect Liu Bei's spouses, his wives, and would not be, he would be allowed himself to be taken hostage if they are looked after, and on the understanding that when he finds when Liu Bei is, he will leave. So as he's taken hostage and Cao Cao wants Guan Yu to work for him, Guan Yu is given a position by the Emperor Xian, the one that is the front of power for Cao Cao. And Guan Yu does actually work for Cao Cao for a little while, which earns him a huge amount of respect from Cao Cao. However, this is always on the understanding that when the opportunity arises, Guan Yu will leave and will return to Liu Bei. And interestingly, in this part, this is the attitude of understanding that Guan Yu is willing to fight for Cao Cao. He's willing to go against some of Cao Cao's internal enemies. This is on the understanding that he will leave, and despite the gifts, the offers of riches, and everything that Cao Cao puts forward to try to convince him to stay and bring the loyalty, Guan Yu is always adamant that he will leave, he will stay, and Cao Cao likes this. This only makes him feel more respect, and he says at some point that a subject who serves his lord but doesn't forget his origins is truly a man of righteousness. So in this case, Guan Yu is serving the emperor, not Cao Cao. He's serving this emperor. However, he doesn't forget where he comes from, and he will go back to this. So that is put forward as this highest level of honor, of loyalty, of gratitude, of understanding where you come from. That is, again, one of the main reasons that Guan Yu is the one who is singled out and put on a pillar as such an influential character, and is ultimately deified as embodying those Chinese characteristics of loyalty, family, country, everything that he can, be put forward together with. And looking at the people, I would love to hear if there are any of you who have read the book, who have interest in the book, and would like to share agreement, commentary, favorite characters. Please, I would love to hear them from the chat. So I think we've only looked at a couple of these main events, because it's very difficult to try to highlight too much from such an enormous novel. And there are so many things that we could really go on all day. Excuse me. So I'd like to look a little bit at the sort of the meaning and the ideas behind the novel. So despite the liberties taken with the historical fact, or what's understood as historical, it's a fascinating novel to help learn about the ideals of the Chinese culture at the time and how they come together. So the novel shows desire for harmony and bringing China together, something that many emperors in a lot of the Chinese culture and Chinese history, and up to today, when we listen to Chinese government and Chinese leaders talk about the Chinese culture as a whole, we hear this word harmonious and harmonious culture and harmonious society again and again and again. And this is something that the novel shows this desire for. Each of the leaders are trying to create a harmonious society. Obviously, it is arguable whether if they truly wished for the harmonious society, they could allow one of the others to take over. But this is the balance of honor and knowing I'm doing the right thing, and the harmonious society should be under me. Of course, the various leaders, the various emperors from further dynasties, each will boast and talk about the importance of harmonious society, living together, working with one another. It's something that is absolutely key to Chinese culture still today. Now, this is also an interesting, at the time, attitudes towards battle and death is something that really stood out to me while I was reading it, because there is perhaps a difference from what this sort of, when I grew up in a military family, the ideals of sort of courage and honor for Western ideals were perhaps different from the leadership ideas that were portrayed in this novel. Whereas in the sort of perhaps some of the Arthurian legends of leaders who are in with the crowd, who are who would never be brave and leading. The generals in this book, the leaders, so even Guan Yu, Liu Bei, Zhang Fei, Cao Cao, Sun Quan, any of them, when they have seen that they are going to lose a battle, their priority is to save themselves, and this is seen as an honorable thing, because the idea that generals are worth tens of thousands of soldiers and they can go and raise another army, but if we lose the general, if we lose the key person, then it's a loss. That's unacceptable. And obviously that was something that did stand out, because from some of our ideas in the ideas of these great leaders shouldn't run away. But in this case, it's the discretion being the better part of valor, to say that, perhaps it's more important that I go and create another army to fight again, rather than protecting my fighting to help save as many of my armies as they can. And it was also interesting to note that while we read each of these the battles, when they do fall down, there is very little quarter given, in that there tends to be a slaughter at the end of each battle. It is a very, very bloody and violent book, so that's something to be quite aware of if you wish to read in it. There is a lot of very large scale battles. So how does this affect pop culture today? So, as I've mentioned, the Three Kingdoms, this book has been the subject of many media adaptations. Perhaps the most famous one late in sort of recent history being the John Woo directed movie from 2008 to 2009 in China. This was a 2-part movie, and actually at the time was the highest grossing film in China. It actually outgrossed Titanic, which was previously the most watched and most lucrative film. It was also one of the most expensive films ever made in China at the time. In China, this was split into 2 parts, and this in the West we had a condensed version. And this also shows the importance of the Red Cliff part of the book, because this movie focuses entirely around the Red Cliff battle. It's worth looking into it, because again, John Woo, we will no doubt have heard, is a very, very famous, internationally well-known director. However, inside China, there have been many smaller movies, there have been many television adaptations. It would never surprise someone that there would be a new adaptation being put forward. There have been mangas, both from China and Japan, based around these characters. There have had different various novelizations, as well as the TV games. There are many computer games, and we can see many mobile games based around these characters, whether or not they're role-playing games, whether or not they're just using the images of people like Guan Yu, Zhang Fei to show certain things. It's a hugely influential book. BBC recently compared it to sort of Homer as the level of importance of this novel, and there have been many interviews with influential Chinese entrepreneurs or other influential people who have seen that, who identify very closely with Liu Bei for that ambition, for the drive, for the rags to riches story, the management and use of his the people. So I think this is about all that I have really to say, again, from this book. It's been I hope this has given you a little bit of an insight into it, but I'd like to have a little bit of an opportunity for discussion now. So if there are any questions or comments about anything that we have said earlier, I would very much welcome them, whether into the Q&A or if you'd like to put them into the chat. I'd love to hear thoughts, ideas, or if you want to know more about where this novel comes from and what, please, I welcome discussions about themes, symbology, influences, and I'd love to hear if there are, from anyone who's read the book, which characters would you like me to have included? Of course, there are, as I've said, we focus on about 6 or 7 of the central characters. There are many others who have great influence. There are a group of 2 other generals at later points who join with Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, and they become what I believe are called the 5 Tiger generals. There are, as you have no doubt seen from this, if you've no doubt seen from my presentation, there are no central female characters, although there are occasionally some female characters who have their parts to play. There is one, as I've mentioned, I believe she is a very influential princess or a family member who actually distracts Cao Cao before the start of the Red Cliff battle by holding a very large or very ornate tea ceremony. Perhaps we can use this as a way to look into with a theory to say the importance at the time, or the roles played, the gender roles of the time, where women had very little ability to influence the larger happenings, and perhaps that it was that people were less interested to discuss that in novels. I would, if you are interested in female characters from Chinese literature, I would always encourage people to go back to the Dream of Red Mansions for some of my favorite characters who are female. Wang Shifeng is one of the greatest characters from Chinese culture. So if you do have questions or comments, again, please, I welcome them in the chat. In the future, we will try to do another discussion about the Outlaws of the Marsh, although I will probably ask someone who's a little more interested in the book to join me for that one, because I did not enjoy it at all, and it would be useful to have a secondary output. As I've mentioned, if you would like to know more about the Confucius Institute, if you'd like to follow us, you can go to us at Confucius Cov Uni on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Just Google us, you will find us. I've put the tag into the chat. And if you want to re-listen or find the recording of this session, you will find that at confuciusinstitute.coventry.domains/news. And I've put that link also into the chat if you are wanting to look into this. I would recommend heartily looking into reading these novels, because they give a great insight into some of the backgrounds and the history of China, looking at aspects and times that we generally don't learn much about in the West. Because I'm sure if you have not studied Chinese history specifically, you would probably have no idea about a Yellow Turban rebellion, or the differences of the Three Kingdoms period of history, or any of these things. So I certainly did not until I read this book. Oh, we have. Thank you very much for that. I'm glad hope you enjoyed it. I'm afraid I can't read your Chinese characters, are so bad. And I have a question here from Simon. I'd like to ask if I've read some books or watched a podcast on the Assyrian. I'll read this one out. Have I read some books or watched podcasts or documentaries about Assyrian wars and king attempts of reunifications, about what similarities, differences are between the two situations, particularly comparing the size of histories of areas between Mesopotamia and China? That's a fantastic question, Simon. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, my background is not history, and I've not looked into anything of the Assyrian backgrounds. It sounds, I'm sure, at the time when we're looking at certainly for myself, some of the Eastern wars, there would no doubt be certainly some parallels between these cultural conflicts, and certainly we can see in European history as well. There would be parallels of rising groups fighting one another. My view on my purpose of reading this book was because I was very much living in China, and my background is in literature, so which is why I looked into reading and looking at how this specifically goes towards China. So I'm sorry, I can't give a better answer or specific answer about the Assyrian wars, but I really do appreciate the question. Thank you for that. So, as I've said, from if you are interested in literature, these 4 novels are fantastic. Sorry, the 3 of the novels are fantastic, and Outlaws of the Marsh is something that we can certainly skip if you want to. But they're fascinating to learn about some of the background, the shared stories, the shared cultural touchstones for the people coming from China. If we have no further questions, I think we can call this a day here. Thank you for everyone for joining me. I hope you've learned something from this, and I hope you've got something good from this. And thank you. That's a very kind thing to say, Simon, from a thought-provoking and enriching presentation. I'm very much hope you've enjoyed it. And should they be read, Daniel Squaga? Should they be read in a certain order? For the 4 great novels, no. There's no particular order for the 4 great novels. So I read Three Kingdoms first because this was one I'd been hearing about. In China, most people would probably learn about the Journey to the West first, as this is perhaps aimed more at the younger audience. This is something that children are more aware of because the main characters, the Monkey King, is shown in a lot of animation, and many children have toys and pretend to be the Monkey King. My daughter downstairs, we have a staff, like literally a stick, which is based on the Monkey King's stick. So that would be one that's very approachable, very interesting. If you want to, I think my favorite of the 4 novels is The Dream of Red Mansions, because this one is very much a sort of intricate discussion of a noble family and their changing circumstances. So perhaps perhaps a little bit of a rise and fall of their fortunes is one way to look at, but that really looks at the inner relationships between family, the duties one has as sort of male and female parts of the families, the relationships between higher classes and lower classes. For myself, it's a fantastic, all-encompassing novel. So I would say that's the best one, but there's no real need to read them all in any particular order. Choose whichever one sounds most interesting for you. But thank you again. Good question. I do like that. So thank you all to everyone. I mean, it's worth saying that the only one I actually have in this country is Dream of Red Mansions. The other ones I left in China with myself. I hope you've learned something. I hope this is, if not, it's been interesting to have an idea. And if you choose to go and find the Red Cliff movie, I enjoyed watching it. I would recommend it. And if no more further questions, thank you all very much for joining me today. And I hope you enjoy not only this afternoon, evening, but also the bank holiday weekend that we have coming up. Thank you very much for joining me, and goodbye. So please next time discuss, if this is CLG, I have already, if you go to the website I have put up above, and I do apologize, my Chinese character reading is very poor, so I won't try your name, but there is a video of my discussion of CLG on the Confucius Institute coventry.domains/news website. So there is also a discussion about Hong Lo Meng, or Dream of Red Mansions, there that you can go to see anytime. I do enjoy talking about them very much because all of these books have been very interesting for myself, and they've been very much helped me enrich my understanding or awareness of Chinese history and their culture. So thank you. Please head back, and if you have questions or wish to discuss this more, please get in touch through the Confucius Institute, either through our social media or emails. Thank you all for joining me, and I will hopefully speak to you all soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you.